We're here at the Deconstruction Zone, but we're missing a person, or we swapped a person. We're
missing her.
We're missing her. You're in front of the mic, in front of the camera, behind the mic. But I'm excited because we got a little different vibe. Emily, she's a teacher, so a little sporadic schedule, but I'm excited to dive into this with you. And I texted you last night. I said, what do you think we should talk about? And what'd you say?
Megachurch pastors.
Megachurch pastors. So
yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, so
to deconstruct,
because
So I'm Dustin. You didn't introduce me. I'm the producer.
Yeah. Introduce yourself. Who are you?
My name's Dustin. I co-own a company called Public Art Company, where you guys record at, and I'm your producer.
Yeah, I love that. Also, though, I think for context, like you've been a pastor, you're creative, you've worked in churches on the West Coast, Midwest, East Coast.
Not East Coast.
Okay.
Because Panama City Beach isn't considered. That's the Panhandle.
Sure.
No, but yeah. So I've worked Seattle, Columbus, Ohio, Panama City, and then up here. So not in church up here, but I worked 25 years in ministry.
Yeah, and did church adjacent stuff here.
No, I did church stuff here.
Yeah,
I didn't do youth ministry here.
Sure.
No, I did church stuff. I planted a church here.
Yeah. So I'd be interested. So we're going to talk about like mega church pastors. And I was just saying before we started recording, and maybe it was while we were recording, I'm not even sure, but that I just started listening to the rise and fall of Mars Hill. You were in Seattle during the time of like the rise of Mars Hill.
Correct.
Pre-fall.
Very early in even, actually.
So because I've been listening to this podcast and I just started it. It's been really interesting for me because like it seems like he was immediately a celebrity from day one, at least the way they're talking about it. Like, so for you as a pastor in the Northwest, specifically in Seattle, like, were you privy to who he was?
Oh yeah. I went to Seattle Bible College, now Seattle Bible University. Don't let the title fool you. It was a Motel 6 that they turned into a school.
Is that true?
Yes, 100%.
I love that.
So it wasn't very big, but I went there, and my college roommate Jamie was their first bass player, and so like I knew about it from jump.
Okay,
but it wasn't a big deal then. It was just like I worked at a church. I was a youth pastor. And, I was actually not a youth pastor yet. I was the junior high, like the middle school volunteer leader.
Sure.
But I was an intern, so I was working towards, and I eventually, the youth pastor moved on, and I took that job. But so, I mean, it wasn't a weird thing back then. It wasn't like, oh, Mars Hill. The only thing weird about it was the name. I mean, that was a weird name because no one was naming their churches these obscure, like biblical references. Yeah. And so, but he was playing there, and he was my friend. And so he'd invite me, and it was in the evening. For a while it was at a church at first it was I think it was at Second Pres downtown. They rented their chapel.
Okay.
And, I think that was their first building, but I'm not sure. And I went to that to watch my friend play bass, and we got there super early because we rode together. And Ballard, where Seattle Bible College is pretty close, but I didn't have a car. I was a mountain bike, poor college student.
You were a Northwester at your core.
Yeah, and so he drove, and so I had to go early. And I just remember the first time I went, I'm in the second row or the front row. I think it was in the second row. And, they're practicing, and you have to get there an hour and a half early. There's nobody there. And people start coming in and out. Mark comes in and out. But again, it's not Mark Driscoll. It's just the pastor. And I've been to 500 churches in my life. And, some white guy gets up there generally at the churches I've been to and says some things. And so it wasn't weird. It wasn't anything, crazy.
Sure.
My first real this isn't normal church experience there was the band had been practicing, and then church started. And when church started, somebody said, "Hey, church is starting," and then they played worship songs. Then there was a break where we all shook hands. We used to do that. I don't think most churches do that anymore. But and I turned around, and when I turned around, the place was packed, and it was empty. It was just a weird juxtaposition. But there was a gal a couple seats back from me who looked like she could have been maybe someone's grandmother, and then like two people over was a guy with like a 3-foot mohawk and a denim jacket with all the patches and the spikes. And I was like, this is different. And there's these punk rock kids there, there's hip hop kids there, there's all kinds of older folks that, to me, I mean, I was 20 or whatever, 21. They were old. So yeah, that was my experience. And then, but the thing about Mark was, I worked at, the nightclub that Leaf Moy purchased. And then, I did security there. But so I've been a part of it at a couple different spaces, but I really wasn't, I didn't attend regularly. I wasn't a member of that church. I worked at a church. So it was just like where I would go and hang out when my friends went. But the thing about Mark that was always really, I thought, intriguing was I'm a guy who grew up without a dad. So there's, masculinity for me. When I see someone masculine, I'm immediately attracted to the masculine nature.
Sure.
I don't care if it's Hulk Hogan or if it's,
but the personality archetype like draws you in.
Yeah. And then of course you start to see their faults and their flaws when it's a movie or TV show, whatever. And with Mark, that's how he was. I mean, I'd never heard a preach. Like usually they're doughy white guys who lost their hair.
Yeah.
They're not usually the coolest guys, at least where the circles I ran with, generally very kind, maybe a little soft. Yeah. And he got up there and he was anything, but I mean, he was known for a long time as the cussing pastor or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is about me. I mean, as a human being, but like in Braveheart, when William Wallace's wife, she gets killed, and then the way he takes out the guy who ordered it the same way that she got taken out, and I cheer, but that's not Jesus.
Yeah.
That's not mercy. That's not grace. That's not love. And he would preach for an hour and he would just be like,
he'd captivate people.
Get used to it. This is what I do. I liked that.
Yeah. Well, that isn't I think that's an interesting point to our conversation in terms of like what captivated you, because for him, it was like very much he was going after, in a lot of ways, I mean, the city of Seattle, but also like specifically men, and either men that felt a void of maybe not having a father, but like from at least what the podcast says and what I've heard and my feelings of it was like guys that weren't living into the fullness of what he deemed to be manhood. And
yeah.
So, but I wonder though, in terms of like this idea of mega church pastors, like as we look around, like I feel like that's a pretty common thread of like mega church pastors is they're like pretty good at like cultural analysis, and they're also like pretty good at speaking to like a felt need. And so Mark, in that community, like it's, for whatever you want to say, like people would say like the Northwest is a more progressive, maybe less masculine place. And he found a group of people that were hungry to be told like being conservative and being masculine, like hyper masculine was the right thing to do. And so I don't know, like from your perspective, like how much do you think does that play into the other megachurch pastors, right? Like the preacher sneakers guys, the Hillsong people, like,
I don't know. I mean, well, let me ask you this real question before I answer that question. Do you think that they do it on purpose? Like, do you think that they have their finger on the pulse of culture and kind of what's missing, and then they go after that? Or because like that's the same way I feel about politics.
Sure.
When I look at our previous president, I mean, he definitely, like him or don't like him, he had a massive impact on like culture. And there was clearly this humongous group of people who felt unheard.
Yeah. So was he a genius, or did he just fall into it?
Right.
Is what you're
That's
saying.
what I wonder those things, because I don't know.
I wonder that, like, I kind of wonder that a little bit, like in terms of pastors. So I think about like is it right place, right time? Is it like really, really just brilliant people? Because I think like whatever you say about Mark Driscoll and some of they really are brilliant people. I think who's the guy? Bill Hybels, right? Like I want, like, for him, his pursuit was of like an economic business person. So, and he built that archetype, and he was in the right area.
Well, and he did that on purpose.
Right. And
clearly.
So I think some of the people are like really, and then what's the Saddleback same guy, Rick Warren, right?
Rick Warren, yeah.
So I think some of it is like, there's a level of calculation in that.
There's also like norms.
Sure.
I mean, in that like people need a mission. Men specifically need to have certain needs and specific things that they want to go after. Women have maybe different things. Yeah. And then we have a lot of things that we go after together. But I don't know. So to answer your question, how much of that, I don't know. I mean, what I know is I look at these mega church pastors and I kind of feel like each one of them, and maybe some of them share common characteristics, but you look at, the guys who write a book. Okay. Like let's take, Purpose Driven Life, for instance. Yeah. I mean, this book came out at a time, it seems like, where self-help was sort of at its peak. It's rising again right now, but like where self-help was like, the thing. And when you see a book that's called Purpose Driven Life, who doesn't want purpose? You know?
My church read it when I remember being maybe middle school, think high school. Like it was the small group study for our entire church. And that's what like my parents and my older brother, like who's Gen Xer, right? Like that's what they were hyper into.
Sure. And I read it. I've read it multiple times.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, you know, it was game changing, but was it? I haven't read it in a while, but like if I went back and read it, is it just a bunch of comments? I don't know. I can't remember.
Sure.
But who doesn't want a purpose? So if you're at the bookstore and you run across this book and you maybe you buy it, it doesn't say Jesus on it anywhere, like in the title at least.
Sure. Yeah, it's in the faith section, but you don't see Jesus or faith anywhere on it.
Right. And so you go, all right, well, I'm at the airport. I like purpose. I'd like purpose and more purpose in my life. So you buy it. But, you know, he got mega wealthy, and that guy's a goof, you know?
Yeah, right.
That guy's a super big goof. And, you know, as far as I know, I don't know. I don't know all of the, I don't know all of the folks that have fallen or messed up, but I think he's not been canceled. I think he's
other than the Southern Baptist Convention not liking that he wants to ordain women now. Other than that, canceling,
right? Well,
I think
nobody takes the Southern Baptist Convention as the end all be all, but at least I don't. But what I would say is like I even read something and I don't know if it's true, but I think it is that he actually paid back the church all of his salary for.
Yeah, I heard he tied like either all of it or 90-something% of whatever the book sales were.
Well, I think he actually lived on the books and did the opposite.
Yeah, might have been one of
them. But the idea that like, I mean, that's noble to me, but he's a goof, he's not like, he's not a Craig Rochelle, and, Craig Rochelle's a goof in his own way, but he's buff.
Yeah, he's buff
and he's, articulate. And I think there's a lot of these pastors. So can I tell you my take on politics, and then I'll lead that into.
Sure, I'm interested.
So I don't think there are any politicians who aren't dirty.
Uh-huh.
I'll say it here first. You heard it here first. I think there are a lot of politicians who start off with really good intentions, and they start off and I'm going to change the system. This group of people that I have with me, we can change the world because we care about these folks, or we care about this group, or we care about the environment, or whatever it is. Yeah. But I don't see, I feel like just systematically it's problematic, because if you have a number of people coming to you trying to sell you on a different idea, so you're creating laws, right? If you're in specific parts of government, and you have people coming to you saying, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, lobbyists.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point you have to sell out to get your thing through. There's no bills anymore that just have one thing, It's always some stacked in crap and folded stuff in. And so you go, well, I'm going to sell out a little bit right here. It's not a big deal to me if we do that,
Yeah.
Maybe hunting season's longer because we need to sell more bullets or whatever it is, right? So he's like, I don't really care, but that really wasn't. This is about adoption.
Sure.
But they're saying so that we're going to fold it in, and so you start selling out a little bit, and then eventually you just become a monster. And that's my take. Yeah. I don't think there's anybody
of who you once were.
Big government. Yeah. Maybe you're not a bad person, but you're just a complete sellout. You're a poser. You are, and I don't think there's anybody in big government that is.
Yeah.
And that might not be your opinion. So this is not the official deconstruction, but
so do you feel that way, just to connect? Is that how you feel then about megachurch pastors?
I think megachurch pastors, I don't think that they're all monsters, but I think they start to believe their own press clippings. I think they start to believe they wrote a book, then they wrote it, and we sold all these books. I mean, I read Homeboy's book from Australia before he got
Brian Houston.
Yeah, it was almost not readable. It was almost. It was. I mean,
like poorly written.
Oh my gosh, he should have had a ghostwriter. It was atrocious. And this is a professional communicator. I actually never finished it. I started it and I bought the book and I started reading it, and I bought the audiobook, and I still couldn't because I can't stand his voice. But but the guy has built
a brand,
thing, So the way I feel about megachurch pastors is that they eventually begin to believe their own hype. And when you believe your own hype, you begin, and I've seen this at so many levels. And when you talk about, I'm just talking about, I can talk about just pastors. I've been at churches with 400 people that have the exact same problem with their ecosystem that a church with 5,000 people has.
Sure.
If you're a pastor who brings it on Sunday and maybe you're not even that good, but everybody, and by not that good, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah,
but like,
so what standard?
but if you preach on Sundays and you stand on a platform and then a bunch of people tell you how good you did, whether it was really good or not, I don't know how as a human being you don't start to kind of take that in.
Yeah, like increase your own stock. It's one of my least favorite parts, actually, and one of the things that I don't think it's because our church wouldn't do it, but because of the way we're geographically or the way we're like spatially designed. Mm-hmm. The last church that I was at, like you would preach and you'd book it down the aisle so that you could shake hands on the way out and be like, "Hey, great sermon today." And it's like, "Hey, I don't even know if you really mean that."
Right.
And it's like, statistically that has to be impossible.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so actually,
well, what does it even mean?
Yeah. What does
that mean? You told good jokes, or does that mean that, but
it's something I wrestle with all the time is like the idea, and I think we can get more into this, and you too, in your pastoral ministry, it's like, you want to be really good at sharing the gospel, whatever good means. You want to invite people to meet Jesus and have their lives transformed. You want to do all the things that are the fruit of that, or at least we've determined the fruit of. But then the dark or shadow side of that coin is you get to the side and you think you did all of that, right? And I think
it creeps in.
Yeah,
it's not like a baseball bat to the head. Like you didn't think you were a dirtbag one day.
Yeah, you didn't wake up saying,
you're amazing.
I don't want to be whoever. Right?
It's just weird, man. Like when I was working at a church that was considered a megachurch for a while, and I had times where people would walk up to me and they wouldn't say hi, Dustin. They would say hi and then the church name. They would call me the church's name. Maybe because they didn't know my name, but I was still like that church famous in the community, if that makes any sense.
So like if you were a Cardinals player, like, "Hey, Cardinals." Like
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So weird. And it happened a number of times.
In public, like not at
in
the
public.
Church, but in
yeah,
public.
No, in public. And it's weird because like my main job there was I was the guy on the camera when we did announcements. So I was the announcement guy. I wasn't, that's why they didn't even know my name. But I could tell you, like, you look around, I could get used to this, like people kind of knowing who I am. And there's clearly this like feeling of like, they think I'm cool, you know, I don't know why, but I think it's because you're on the platform or on the screens.
There's like something from the podcast, the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, that I was listening to and maybe they're going to get more into it. You finished it. I haven't. But the connection between like your ability to communicate really highly and share the truths of those things and have a brand, all those things really outpacing the cultivation of your character. And like, that's something that my wife and I talk a lot about. And like, we don't think the Well is going to be a mega church. We don't think that I'm going to have a million followers, but like the potential that happens, like we're always trying to like think about what are we rooted in, because her biggest fear, and one of my biggest fears, is the idea that like I become so invested in the theology or the brand of who I am. And that like the whole reason, like I remember the reason I got into ministry was because I remember what it felt like to not know Jesus and to see people that did know Jesus and know what it felt like to be on the outside. Yeah. And like, that's always has to be the thing I point back to, because it's not about like, and I haven't written a book, but how many books did I sell, or how many podcast downloads or sermon listens or high fives after service. But then you see the people like the Linces and the Driscolls and the whoever's, and not saying that's probably unfair to even put them into that, but like the back padding becomes what you're after in some ways, or at least the fear when I look at myself, right? Or to see the pastors' faces on billboards. You see them all around St. Louis, and it's like the idea of that like just drives me crazy.
The idea that you think that when someone's driving by, that if they saw your face or you and your cute wife, that you're going to show up to the church service, because
I would love to see like
there's no way that works. There's no way.
Can't.
I mean, no. I mean, we know that people go to church because they get invited by someone else. That's why people go to church.
Invitation,
or they have a devastating thing that happens in their life, and then they just or they move. Google it. So I mean, when it comes to megachurch pastors, I mean, I don't know how you don't believe. I'm not even throwing shade at those dudes, because I don't know how I would do it either. I mean, think about if you were a musician, if you were a stand-up comic, if anything you get big in.
Like once Emily's famous.
Yeah, right. Once Emily's famous.
We'll have to be your anchors to bring her back down.
What is it? High school teacher? Which is a famous high school teacher.
No, comedian.
I know, I'm kidding. I'm being a comedian.
I like that.
No, but I think that like, I don't know how you're supposed to guard against that, because I think one of the things that you would do is you'd put people around you, like your wife, that would help ground you again. The problem is you probably aren't going to get to megachurch status if you don't have. It's almost like Steve Jobs, like Craig Rochelle. I mean, that dude, as far as I know, not canceled.
It seems to be
fine, but I mean, he created like YouVersion and, he was Methodist. He was in the Methodist system like you. Yeah. Did you know you're in the Methodist system?
I didn't know that. And I knew he was.
Yeah. And they rejected his ideas, they were too wild. And now he's,
the largest,
arguably got the biggest church in the world.
At least in the United, I think it's the biggest church in the United States for sure.
I mean, because it's not really in one place. It's the internet,
I see all the time. If you go on Indeed, they are like permanently hiring campus pastors for every location. Yeah. And they're like unpaid volunteers job, but you can find them.
Really?
Like I remember when I was looking for jobs before I moved to St. Louis, like I was Googling like pastor jobs and like across the country. Didn't matter what city I Googled, like Life Church was. And it's because like they have built a church that's built around one person's personality, obviously, but one that their model is to build it anywhere. So that's kind of a divergence, but they're everywhere.
Yeah. It's crazy, and but if they're reaching people with the gospel, it's cool. I have no problems. Like my saying is like anything short of sin. Yeah. But then I also rage against people who like churches that do stupid things like, I'm going to give you free gas if you listen to our spiel. Because then it just feels like a gross sales
Give
pitch.
An iPad, come to church and get a free iPad.
Right. And I've done all that stuff, man. I have.
So here's a question I have for you, because one of the questions that I'm hearing posed is how much of it is the megachurch or the pastor, the elders, the board, or the megachurch itself's fault, and how much of it is like our fault as a culture in terms of like what we're desiring. And one of the things the podcast I was listening to was referencing it talks a lot, at least to this point, about boomers and Gen X. And I'm thinking of like we're always so far behind sociologically when we're talking about like. We should be talking about Gen Z, right?
And right.
So I wonder even if like that's going to be that compelling as we go with the mega church celebrity. Maybe it is. I'm watching like TikTok brands are pretty important, but the heart of my question, I guess, is like how much do you think it's our draw to big personalities? Like, is it 50% culpability, or is it like these people capitalized on a need and like where do you see the and guilt's the wrong word, but where do you see the sharing of responsibility in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with churches is full of people.
Sure.
And so when you're in church and your pastor's a big deal, it rubs off on you. It feels nice to say, I go to X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, like
church.
you're a part of a big deal.
Yeah, and now you're like, oh, and so like all of a sudden now, like if you're in the Wu-Tang entourage, you're a big deal. Yeah. They don't ask me to come hang out and travel all over. So I think that I don't know if there's a percentage, but definitely culture and celebrity culture is at its peak.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a pastor, I mean, I'll tell you, like, Lentz broke my heart.
Yeah.
Carl Lentz, I loved Carl, and I'd seen him preach live, but I listened to him weekly because I really feel like I felt like he was a solid preacher, and I liked what he had to say. And of course, sometimes I didn't like what he had to say, and that's also good if you're in church because you mean iron's supposed to sharpen iron. And so, and then, but the thing that really irked me the worst with him, and I was just culpable because I didn't worship him, but he was my guy, you know what I mean? Sure. Like I was Team Lentz, and then to have him, like it didn't just seem like there was some financial issue or a mistake, or he thought he was doing the right. It was like full on. It seemed like premeditated. And he's a stud. Okay. Like dude's ripped,
but it wasn't
a good basketball player.
It wasn't a misappropriation of funds or like, even with,
or he didn't walk into a hotel room and all of a sudden like, whoops, it was like,
or even the Matt Chandler thing where he's like, I'm having unguarded conversations.
Right.
Like it was calculated, in regards to what everyone thinks that, but like it was calculated, like decisions.
Right. Yeah. And so that just broke my heart. And, he's kind of back now. He posted like 2 days ago. I don't know when this is going to go live, but, a photo shoot of his family and thanked everybody who was standing by them and all that. Yeah. And I'm like, yo, dude, you played your cards, bro. Like that's it.
Well, what do you think of? So I'm interested.
Now I am into mercy and grace and forgiveness.
Yeah, so that's what I'm interested in that because I've been thinking about that because I remember when I heard Driscoll started the new church in I think Arizona.
Well, and he did it in like my understanding is contrary to how his advisors and the elders that they brought in to try to figure this whole thing out, like what they against their wishes. I think.
Well, when this all was going on, I was still in the Northwest, and so I like the ripple effects even down to Portland. You could feel the seismic activity. And I was working a little like monthly in Seattle with a Christian college, and so like I could feel it. Like you watched churches go up 800 people in attendance, the bigger ones, and some like 50 people, right?
Yeah,
like,
because they left.
Yeah, you just saw that. And so, but I remember when he started because I didn't know the full. This is really interesting now because I'm learning so much more of the story. But I remember I was really pissed because I was like, you played your cards, you messed up, like you're out, like this, it's done, right? And I've been wrestling with that since because like he's got a pretty decent TikTok following now. I think his church is pretty big. You never know when you don't go to something, but you imagine he has influence. But like, and then I look into scripture and I see people like that are killing Christians, and then all of a sudden they're like the number one like evangelist out there, and like
right.
So I don't like. That's one of the things I wrestle with, and this is a very different topic, so we don't have to chase this rabbit very long. But with the lenses, and then there's what's Billy Graham's Neptolian, like there's that guy. Or Billy Graham's like grandson or something like that, and then Driscoll. All these people like they make resurgence.
Yeah,
there is like some excitement and like maybe God's grace has prevailed. But then I also on the other side of like talking about both sides of the house, like did any of the leadership issues actually get solved? You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know if I have a question there, but I'm just saying like inside of me, I wrestle with that.
I understand. I do too, and I mean that's because our flesh wants revenge. It wants a pound of their flesh because they screwed up, right?
Yeah.
But I think that,
and also me wanting like if I know I ever mess up, like I do feel called to this.
Yeah.
And it's like there's so many things that could like I remember thinking of my divorce, like, oh, am I done now?
Right. That's how I felt too with mine. Yeah. Well, my 2 cents on that is that yes, of course we have to follow the scripture and we have to have grace for people if they're truly repentant. And it's really hard to know if they're truly repentant until 10 years later to see if they've relapsed in the whatever it was that they were doing. But my thing is the Bible's really clear about issues in the church. The Bible's clear. Like if you have a problem with somebody, you go to that person.
Yeah. And
then if that person doesn't change or make efforts to move forward, then you bring one other person. So now there's 2 of you that have gone to that. And before you go to the church, then you go before the whole church and you issue your complaint. And there's supposed to be like some sort of redemption in bringing you back. You're supposed to be removed and then you're supposed to be brought back after you've had counseling or rehab or whatever it is that you needed. Because they're just human beings, you know.
But a reinstating after the...
Yeah. And I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
What I see is
you'll go create a new sandbox somewhere.
They fire him immediately because they want to distance themselves from the noise. That's not biblical.
Sure.
I mean, we're the only religion that shoots our wounded, you know, like we're just like, oh, you could possibly get some stank on me.
Yeah.
I'm out, you know, and that's not what Jesus did. I mean, Jesus like literally went to the stinky people. Like that was his goal. So I look at, some of the people that I've been looking at for a long time and just kind of watching is like people that are real, like real people doing real ministry. And you can tell when you go to a church if they're selling you a bag, a bag of malarkey, I mean, sometimes you can't, and that's a little scary if they're that good.
Yeah.
But, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, right? Like just full, they're both nut jobs, but they went from, I think, people who love Jesus and probably still do. I don't know. I think Tammy's dead.
I don't even know who they are.
Oh, you don't know who Jim and Tammy Faye Baker are?
No.
Oh, you definitely. There's so many documentaries and things of this nature out there of them.
Give me like 30
like
seconds.
First televangelists ever. Like literally had like a full Graceland, like a full, they were building an amusement park for Christians, like a huge Disney World for Christians. And misappropriating funds, whatever. But in all kind, there was sexual things and whatever. And Ted Haggard is too, right?
I think so.
Okay, we can talk about him too. He was the one that was like doing blow and hiring male escorts. And he was a big televangelist.
More newspapers.
But here's the thing. They're just humans.
Sure.
Ted Haggard, probably his whole life, he's probably gay, and he's probably been told his whole life, you can't do that. That's not what God wants. So he marries a nice girl. He has kids. He does the things he's supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah.
In the eyes of the church. And then, but it doesn't fulfill the way he feels like he is. And so he does this other thing. I don't know where the drugs come in, but maybe he had to do the drugs so he could do the other stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
But Jim and Tammy Faye Baker's kid, his name's Jay Baker, and he's a pastor at a bar church in New York City.
Okay.
But he, like a decade ago, like 6 people was going to his church.
Okay.
But he's all tatted up, and he's just a real dude. He's a real one, And I look at these people and go, and I mean, he screws up all the time. Like that's the whole thing, is that he's not
like
afraid.
He's not putting a facade out.
No, he's not trying to sell you the bill of goods and make you feel like he's the holiest guy in the room. And I'll tell you this right now, like I'm super guilty of this. Like I always thought that the pastor should be, if I go to a church, the pastor needs to be holier than me. The pastor needs to be the holiest dude in the room. If I go to a mechanic to fix my car, because I can't fix it because I don't know how, they better fix it. They're supposed to know how to do that. If I go to a restaurant and it's a skinny chef, I don't like that. I want a guy who eats, or a gal who eats. When I go to church, I need that pastor to have more understanding and biblical depth and a theological understanding more than me. And I want them to be holier than me.
Sure.
Because I need somebody to follow, right? So I've been guilty of that. And now I go to a church online where the pastor constantly talks about his flaws. Matter of fact, he talks about how people leave his church on a pretty regular basis because he talks about his flaws and his sins and how he's working towards doing better. But if we're just human beings, and like this is if you're not a Christian and you look at us, who wants to be a Christian?
Yeah.
If God hasn't captured your heart, like the Holy Spirit done that work, forget it, because we suck.
Yeah.
We're all hypocrites. Including me, everybody. Every Christian is a hypocrite, and we don't represent Christ well at all. And of course, that's because we're humans. But why do we act this other way?
Yeah,
we should just act like we're dirtbags because we're dirtbags.
Yeah,
and I know that Emily has a whole different opinion.
Sure. Well,
I think she's
funny
wrong
because this episode will come out right after the Holy Spirit episode. You just talked about the Holy Spirit, which I think is really funny.
Okay.
But what is interesting? So, like at the core of what I hear you even saying. Let's go back to the Graceland people, right? The guy whatever the reason is of doing drugs and having escorts, right?
That's Ted Haggard.
Ted Haggard. Sorry. Yeah. So that guy, like, I think there is a level of like, and I feel this, right? Like, because I have a denomination. Maybe you don't feel this if you're non-denominational, but as a pastor, like you get to the point where like you finally got you're ordained or you have the church or whatever you were striving for, right? And you look around and you're like, oh, I still like have sinful desires. I still I'm still a human. And you look around and you're like, well, you have 2 choices. And there's a pastor who's no longer a Methodist pastor, which I really actually respected, and still do respect. But he's no longer a Methodist pastor. But I really appreciated that he wore his sin, so to speak, on his sleeve. Like he was always very upfront about who he was and what he was struggling with. And I think it was kind of to his demise within a system. And I think what I find to be really hard is my sinful desires, my pride, my arrogance, lust, any of those things have not gone away the day I got ordained or the day that I became a Christian or the day I became a pastor.
It's frustrating.
But then you get into that place and you have to get on the pulpit every Sunday. And even in our church don't have a pulpit. You have to stand up in the bar in the cool church or whatever, but you still have to like project some level of knowledge and not perfection, but it's like, but if I roll in hungover, like that's a bad look, right?
Sure.
But I would also say come to church hungover. Like I'd rather have you in church.
Come to church drunk.
Right. And so like
if you're drunk already.
And I'm not saying that to say like I want to do any of those things, but I think like there is, on the positive way to articulate it, there's a burden of leadership that I think can be overwhelming to people.
Sure.
And there's also a burden of trying to present a false sense of self. And I think that's where I watch a lot of these. And I say guys because primarily guys, because that's who's had the keys to the church. Like this Mars Hill podcast is funny because they only use men. Right. And it's like, but I'm thinking like, oh, the audience is only people that think men can be pastors. But so when I say that, like whoever the pastors are, there are those 2 kind of competing things that I think really prevent pastors specifically from being able to be authentic, which is for at least you. But I also think for the upcoming generations is what's the most compelling is an authentic version of like, I don't have to have it all together. I don't have to be perfect. But I'm invited to be in community with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think that we need to have communities I think that's why groups like Celebrate Recovery do so well.
Sure.
Because a lot of times their leader is a guy or a gal who was on heroin or whatever.
And is allowed to be honest about it.
And can just say, I mean, they do like AA and these other ones where they get up and they say, this is my issue and I'm a follower of Jesus or whatever they say. But the idea is first, I was a sinner and I was saved by the grace of God. And I'm still a sinner, but I'm saved by the grace of God every day. And that's another whole concept that we don't talk a lot about, but like salvation happens every day. Like every day you're like resaved. And I don't mean that in a
like you could
theological way. Yeah. But it's this idea that we're making decisions every morning. If we're going to, when we get up, who are we going to serve today? And
I just did a wedding.
It's easy to serve yourself.
Yeah. I just did a wedding and like in my message talking about like what the key to a successful marriage is. And it was like, it's not like really big. It's choosing every day to like love that person. Right. I think it's the same thing with like a relationship with God. It's like, it's a daily choice to say, am I going to choose God? I'm going to choose my relationship with God over what my fleshly desires are calling me.
And guess what? Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
And God still loves me. God, on my worst day, God loves me. He's crazy about me.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing. It's like our choice doesn't dictate God's choice, which I think is the thing that oftentimes would be the cynical response. Like, well, that seems like it's X, Y, and this is a bummer. Like, we'll have to actually revamp this conversation with Emily's back because I think it'll add.
Yeah, we're not really talking about past mega churches anymore.
But I do think it's interesting. Well, I think we are in some ways because we're talking about the impact of the perfect celebrity pastor and the trickle down to us. Because when I look at it, I think that's part of where, at least in my role of wanting to be a pastor and my understanding of Christianity, I base it too on mega churches and pastors and people. To your thing, like I go to the chef or the mechanic or whatever, the pastor, I based my understanding of what it meant to be a Christian and later a pastor off the versions of pastors I saw primarily in large churches.
Well, yeah, because why are you going to see the other ones? They don't get any press coverage or any kind of, they don't even know how podcasts work.
And in the genesis of the internet, right? Like there was only a few of them out there to like model. So like I listened to a lot of Driscoll sermons, even though I didn't listen to him because like, well, I got to listen to someone's sermon in my dorm room, right?
Yeah. And he had his online.
And he had them online?
They were online. Well, I think mega churches, I think if you're a person who attends a mega church, there's a lot of people who are very happy in a mega church.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, there's a whole group of people that just check the box because they went to church. There's a whole group of people that serve, and it's a comfortable, cool place to serve because the lights are cool and the smoke machines and the guitars and there's good music. It's not some tone deaf, 17-year-old kid trying to lead worship because that's all they have,
Sure.
Is it authentic? I don't know. And that's the question is like, what are you like? For me, I desire that. I went to a church in Austin when we lived there for a while. That was that guy. I mean, it was a guy who could barely hold that note, and it was not great. It was in a school gym, church plant startup. You set up and tear down the whole thing, and but I loved it. I loved it. I loved that guy's heart for Jesus. I loved that. No one else had stepped up, so he figured out how to play guitar, and he's doing this thing. And it wasn't about him clearly because he was probably
the person over the product, right?
Yeah, it was great, man. And now I go to a church online where the guy sounds like Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan, I mean, he's a great storyteller, but he's not a fantastic vocalist. Let's be honest. I mean, and I love it.
Yeah.
I just love it. I loved it. I mean, for a long time, I thought the hymns were lame, and now I love them. It's like I'm getting old too. But.
Yeah. Well, I do think there's a little bit of a cyclical nature of like the things that end seasons and all that. And so, but to tie it in real quick, like, so when we think about this in terms of deconstruction, like how much, if at all, do you think the mega church world, the celebrity pastor has tied into deconstruction? So, I mean, in the last, we'll say 5 years, maybe 10, there's been a dozen large pastors that have, or churches that have fallen for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Like from your perspective, like, and you've been in church ministry longer than I have, like, how have you seen?
I've been in church ministry since you've been born.
I think that's probably right. So where do you see the correlation or connection between these two?
I actually think there's a lot of correlation. I think that the megachurch has set a precedence for what is success in a church. If you're Michael Jordan, there's probably not a lot of, back then there was no one could beat him. He was Michael Jordan, right?
Michael Jordan.
And so everyone is sort of trying to do this thing where we're trying to meet the needs of people, but we're doing it in this way where we start to copy each other. And then there's some pressure on the leadership because once, if you're the pastor, you're the leaders of this church, and then you go build a $10 million building, your name's on that. Your social security number is associated with that. Now, all of a sudden, it's a whole nother ball game. It's there's reasons why I got to get butts in seats, whether those are pure and holy or whatever, right? So I think that honestly, I don't think I've known anyone who is a lover of Jesus who has deconstructed their relationship with Jesus if they had a relationship with Jesus. I see a lot of people who deconstruct their relationship to the church. Yeah. And it's because they've been wounded by humans. And I have been wounded by humans. And honestly, I've probably wounded other humans in the ministry. I've probably made jokes at their expense and hurt them. I've probably overworked them and not seen their great contribution to the organization and let them have a break every once in a while. I mean, I've probably done that myself, so I'm probably guilty. But when you look, I know I am. I'm not probably. I am guilty of that. And then you go, well, we're doing this so people know Jesus. Well, I don't know if that's true. I mean, I don't find that lots and lots and lots of people, and you don't find it in the Bible, come to know Jesus in the synagogue or in the church. Yeah. That's not where it happens.
It's not where they met him, right?
Even up until Billy Graham, it was, those were, yes, it happens. Of course, people meet Jesus at church, but it's in the marketplace that people generally will have an influence over them. If you have a friendship, I've got some friends right now that are in a bourbon club with me that I have specifically met in the marketplace and invited them to the bourbon club. I have not invited them to church. Yeah. But I'm building that relationship, and I have chips in the game, and I have an ulterior motive eventually to hopefully have some influence. I know one of those guys feels the same way about me because he works out at the gym all the time. He's yoked, and he's a big dude. And he's asked me lots of, hey, when are you going to join the gym? I need a workout buddy. Yeah. So he's got an ulterior motive too. Sure. And they're both pure. I care about his eternal soul. He cares about my belly and my overhang and my pants here. So, in my health, right? I think it's neat that we both care about each other. Sure. Eventually, maybe I join the gym and I go, and maybe he meets Jesus. That'd be cool, man. I think that'd be super cool. But those have to be the motivating factors. It can't be, oh, we got to build a bigger sanctuary. Yeah. We have to get the bigger name worship leader. We have to do this conference. We have to write a book. That's all about you, man. And I've been there. I mean, I had a huge youth group at multiple churches when I was a youth pastor, and I was very successful at it. Yeah. And it was a lot about me. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting idea because it's a case of where the means become the end, right? The book should be the thing that's helping people meet Jesus, right? The bigger building should be helping people. Any of those things should be that, but the end, it become the means rather, right? And so, no, the means become the end. I said it right the ends justify the means. Well, I'm kind of stupid, so I don't know what all these sayings mean. I'm not kind of stupid. I'm super stupid. The train left the, I don't know. But one thing that you said that I find to be really compelling was and I don't think it's nobody. I think there are people maybe that are deconstructing Jesus, but I think maybe, and again, out of both sides of my mouth, they're deconstructing the church and what they've been told about Jesus from the church. Yeah, right. And so they, in a sense, are deconstructing Jesus, but they're deconstructing what they were told to be true about Jesus. Right. And I think for sure, that's one of the things that I find to be the hardest thing about being a pastor and being a pastor that wants to grow something. I look at the Driscoll, he was deconstructing what he thought was wrong with the church. Mm-hmm. And he would never admit that. Get him on the spot. He'd be like, I've never deconstructed a day in my life. Sure, right? Of course. But he was deconstructing his I'll deconstruct your jaw from your face, bro, if you say that again. I think you will. Mark, we'll have you on anytime you want to be on. But I think that he is deconstructing what he knew to be true. And he was, I think,
at the beginning, he had I disagree with him theologically on a lot of
Yeah.
things, but I think his heart was pure. I
Sure.
would actually say that. But then you get bigger and you build this thing, and now you're looking at this path of wreckage and carnage, and the people that are out of that, and anyone is churches, and the same with you and me. Like you said, there's probably some carnage in your path. I know there's some in mine. Like as you were saying that, I had like specific faces pop up of like staff I've worked with or congregants where I've done them dirty, right? And not intentionally, but I burned them out or whatever. And that's, I think, a lot of times what people are deconstructing. And when I look at the point of what I want, the reason I'm engaging in this is to not just to right the wrongs of things I've done in the past, but to create space to be like,
sure,
this is a real thing. And it may not be who Jesus is or who God is. It might be that. But it's like, how do we name with honesty and vulnerability the way the church has messed it up? And then say like, how can we do better? And create spaces for feedback for that.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Emily's a unicorn too. I mean, she, in her own way, like just how smart she is and how educated she is in her own tradition. Yeah. And then to be able to come on and to be able to articulate that in the way that she does.
And still have a passion for the church.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? I think there could be an entire podcast where you just get on with people and they tell you how they were hurt and wounded by the church, and you just say that you're sorry.
Yeah.
Like you take it on as the representative of the church.
Yeah.
And then
it's like reverse confession instead of like forgive you. Like, I'm just sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. And then if they want to hear your 2 cents on it, you do. But if they don't, that's okay too. They got to get it out to a pastor. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah. I don't know my heart. I don't know if it could take that. It probably needs that.
Yeah.
Because I do think like that's one thing too. I think about, I've got to where I'm at and I don't know that there is, but I think that maybe there could be a pastor that's like, I've never hurt anyone.
There's no way, man.
And that you have to like, I'm a pretty nice guy and I can also be a huge a-hole.
Yeah.
And there's no way. And I mean, I have like
just human beings, man. Yeah. We're just human beings.
Human
beings that live in a world constantly bombarded with sin and lustful images and people dropping the F-bomb. I love saying the F word.
Yeah.
But I try really hard not to because not because I think it's offensive. I think it's a sound that we make with our vocal cords like everything else. But I don't want someone else. I don't want to damage the reputation of Jesus that I may have in someone else's eyes.
Yeah.
Because
you're
I chose a
whether
word.
You like it or not.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I love sinning. It's fantastic. It's so fun. But it's not, God says not to, and I go, all right, well, I want to, but you say not to, I say, I love you. I say, I trust you. I'm going to try not to do it, and I still screw up and do it all the time. But like, let me say this real quick story. Young woman, shouldn't say girl, young woman who's one of my leaders. But just in the summer, she's in college back in the day. She comes to my office. Old churches? Yeah, old church, a long time ago. And she comes into my office with a Bible and it's got like maybe 6 or 8 tabs marked.
Okay.
And she said, Dustin, I would like to talk to you. I'd like to speak to you privately if that's okay. I said, yeah, no problem. Sit down, close the door. We had windows, so all good, no, nothing weird. But she starts to go systematically through each tab and use scripture to put me in my place. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't done anything like real bad or anything. I'm just real slick tongued and I can make fun of people really fast. And I guess sometimes I'm finding their weakness and that's painful. And I would do it at make everyone laugh at the expense of one person.
Right.
And I'm really good at it. And I wish it wasn't my like one
your
superpower.
Spiritual gift.
Yeah. And so she came in and told me what was what. And I mean, that was 15, 18, maybe, no, it was longer. It was like 18, 19 years ago. And it still affects me. I mean, and the bravery that this young lady had, I mean, at first I said, I apologized to her, but it was all lip service. I just wanted to get her out of my office.
Yeah,
but
you're like, this is BS.
I was so red. I was just like, no, I mean, I felt called out and embarrassed, but I also felt like, who are you?
Yeah.
To come in here and tell,
to my office.
And it was a huge office on the corner with windows. But I mean, I'm telling you, it's affected me to this day, her bravery. But, I know I must have hurt her at some point, or she saw how I was hurting other people.
Yeah, it was empathetic.
And she was like,
that,
this isn't right, man. And she did what the Bible says. One-on-one, she came to me. And if I wouldn't have changed, and I'm not sure how long, I don't think I went like this and flipped a switch because I've been doing that my whole life as a defense mechanism. I hope she would have brought another brother or sister and said, it was cool that she was trying to,
help you out,
do it right. And help me out and help the other kids out.
In comedy, they have a phrase for what you just did.
A callback?
That's a callback, baby.
From when?
You talked about bringing a person with you, and if it doesn't work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. I called it
callback.
I did a callback. This is going to be a long one.
So I was going to say, I think we'll wrap it up. But as we end, one of the things that I think we've done a above average job in is like we name concerns, but then we don't leave by just taking a big dump on everything.
Sure,
we're going to let it burn, right?
Right,
so
right.
In the reality of what we see, like, what is your hope for the church moving forward, knowing that maybe we will certainly continue to have mega churches and celebrity pastors and all of that, and it's going to have its inherent issues, and maybe there's inherent issues. We could do a whole episode on 15-person churches that are hyper insular. Probably we could do the same thing, right? Sure. But what's your hope for the church out of this conversation?
I hope that
and the deconstructor, I guess. So for the church and the deconstructor.
Yeah, my hope for the church is that the people that are in the congregation, that they make Jesus their hero. And I know that sounds corny and cliche.
Yeah.
But if you're reading your own Bible, if you're spending time with God, like, and that becomes the relationship that you have to have, like that you desire, then you don't need, it might still be fun and you might like it, what goes on at a church meeting. We have to still gather. The Bible's pretty clear about it. We need to be in each other's lives, iron sharpen iron, all that stuff. But you don't have to, going to a big church with a good coffee and all the people that open the door for you and all that stuff, that's just all luxuries. Yeah. You don't need that. You can go to a smaller church. I would also say, look for a church, figure out what your things are. Like, what do you need a church to be? And I know what mine are. I have 3. One is that there's a space for my teenage kid and my 11-year-old kid. Like, is there a youth group? Is there some kind of thing that they're going to connect to? That's most important, because I can self-feed. I don't need a pastor up there preaching, because most of the time I've heard it 100 times, Sure. Second thing is I need to be a part of a church that is authentic and honest and real. And then third, they have to be involved in the community in some way. We need to be able to serve God. We can't just go to meetings, sing songs, and then leave. Sure. We have to be giving back to the community in some way. And that's not like a feel-good thing. That's a physical representation of us serving the planet. And I don't mean like global warming, although that's important too. But it's the community seeing us and saying, "Oh, that's a group of Christians," and look at this kind thing they've done for our park or whatever it is, or we're feeding people, or like what you guys did when the storm came through. I mean, you guys were a physical representation of love to people that needed it, and that's what God is love. I mean, that's it. You were literally being God, not that you're God, but your actions were a reflection. Christian means tiny Christ. Yeah. So you're being a little Christ. Yeah. We're
representing the love of Christ. Yeah. So your encouragement would be to find not your thing in the sense of like the seeker thing.
Yeah. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay that it's not the coolest thing you ever did. Find authentic relationships, whether that's a small group or whatever it is in your community, and figure out where you should be. I'm going to a church right now in Portland, Oregon, and we live in St. Charles, Missouri. Yeah. So I'm not serving, and it's a battle. I'm battling inside my chest. I've gone to every church, save 1 or 2 in this area, trying to find to check those 3 boxes. It's amazing. Yeah. They're not that hard. You know, there's one that does check all 3. They're just so odd. So now I have to just go, okay, it doesn't matter if they're odd. Yeah. Because I have my own oddities, right? So anyway. And then for the deconstructor, I would just say, just keep looking at Jesus, because I promise you, man, like, I know that's a dumb thing to say, or like a cliche thing to say, but just keep reading the Gospels. Just keep looking at how Jesus interacted with the dirtbags, how Jesus interacted with people that the whole rest of the society shunned, how Jesus interacted with the wealthy people and the powerful people. He was a rebel, man, and he just I don't know how you couldn't be in love with him.
Well, I love that. I think I would echo that in the sense that like the church is important in the sense that it's community. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, I think, is really important. And I think my hope is this is just the opening up of a larger conversation of the importance of church and how we can maybe reimagine it and understand that Jesus is a central figure and the church is the way we've attempted to organize around that. And how can we figure out how to do that with meaning and with purpose and intentionality, but like you said, keep our eyes fixed on Jesus throughout the process. So, friends, with that, I think this was a fun chat. Let's embrace the journey.
Last word.